Is there a problem, ma'am? This is a restricted military training facility. Lost your way from the community center. Sergeant Kane's voice cut through the shimmering heat of the firing range, each word dripping with condescension. He was young, built like a bulldog, with a jaw that seemed permanently clenched around his own arrogance. His audience, a line of sweat-soaked sniper trainees, shifted uncomfortably on their bellies in the dust. They had been missing targets all morning, and Kane's temper was frayed to a razor's edge. The old woman standing near the ammunition shed was the perfect outlet for his mounting frustration. She was slight, with gray hair pulled back in a simple, no-nonsense bun. Her clothes were worn but clean, a faded flannel shirt, denim jeans, and sturdy boots that had seen better decades. She held a small, canvas satchel clutched in one hand and watched the proceedings with an unnerving stillness. She didn't look lost. She looked patient. "I was told to meet Colonel Miller here," she said, her voice quiet but carrying clearly in the dry air. It was a voice that held no tremor, no apology. It was simply a statement of fact. Kane scoffed, a harsh, grating sound. He strode over to her, deliberately positioning himself to block her view of the range, an unsubtle assertion of dominance. "The colonel is a busy man. He doesn't have time for visitors, especially not ones who wander onto a live-fire range. This area is off-limits to civilians." He glanced at her worn boots, a smirk playing on his lips. "Whatever you're selling, we're not interested. Now, I suggest you head back to the main gate before you get yourself hurt." He turned his back on her, dismissing her completely, and focused his fury back on his trainees. "Martinez, you're anticipating the recoil again. Are you trying to shoot the target, or are you afraid of it? You're all afraid of it. A 2,000-yard shot and you can't even hit paper at 800. The old woman, Alara, didn't move. She remained by the shed, a silent, unassuming statue of patience. Her presence was a quiet rebuke to Kane's loudmouthed authority, and it grated on him more than the missed shots. He could feel the rookie's attention divided between his commands and the strange, silent woman. It was undermining his control. He stalked back over to her, his voice dropping to a low, menacing growl. "Did you not hear me? I gave you an order. This is a United States Army facility. My facility, my range, my rules. And my rules say unauthorized civilians get out." He jabbed a thumb toward the dusty road leading back to the main base. Alara met his glare without flinching. Her eyes, a pale, washed-out blue, seemed to see right through his bluster. "Colonel Miller is expecting me," she repeated, her tone unchanged. "He said to wait here. He'll be along shortly." The sheer calm of her response was an accelerant on the fire of Kane's temper. He saw it as defiance, a challenge to his authority in front of his men. He wanted to humiliate her, to make an example of her. "The colonel isn't here, is he?" Kane sneered. "But I am. And I'm telling you, you're a distraction. Look at them." He gestured wildly at the trainees, who were now openly staring. "They can't focus. They can't shoot. All because some lost old woman decided to have a picnic on my range. You see, gentlemen," he shouted to his squad. "This is what happens when you lose focus. This is what weakness looks like. It wanders in when you're not paying attention and disrupts everything. It's a liability." He leaned in closer to Alara, his voice dropping so only she could hear. "You are a liability. Now for the last time, get out of my sight." A hot gust of wind blew across the range, kicking up dust that swirled around Alara's feet, but she stood her ground, unmoving and unshaken by his tirade. Just then, the top-ranked trainee, a young specialist named Corporal Davis, took his final shot of the qualification series. He was the team's best hope, their most promising marksman. He squeezed the trigger, and the powerful crack of the M2010 rifle echoed across the plains. A moment of silence, then the spotter's voice came over the radio, flat with disappointment. "Mississippi low and left." A collective groan went through the line of trainees. Kane squeezed his eyes shut, his face turning a deep shade of crimson. He spun on his heel, his rage finally boiling over. He wasn't just angry, he was embarrassed. His elite sniper course was failing, and this woman was a witness. He fixed his furious gaze on Alara, and a cruel, sarcastic idea formed in his mind. He would make her the centerpiece of their failure. "You know what?" he announced, his voice dripping with venomous mockery. "Maybe she can do better. What do you think, Grandma? You seem to know everything. You've been watching all morning. You probably have some ancient wisdom for these boys, huh? He walked over to the firing line and unceremoniously picked up Davis's rifle. He held it out towards her, a mocking invitation. Here, show us how it's done. I'm sure a tough old bird like you can handle a little recoil. Or is this thing heavier than your knitting needles? A few of the rookies chuckled nervously, catching their sergeant's cue. The air thickened with a sense of impending cruelty. Davis looked down at the ground, ashamed to be a part of it. Alara's gaze shifted from Kane's face to the rifle he was holding. It was a beautiful and deadly piece of engineering, a tool she knew intimately. For a long moment, she just looked at it, her expression unreadable. Kane's smirk widened. What's the matter? Cat got your tongue? Or are the iron sights too confusing for you? Alara's pale blue eyes lifted from the rifle and met Sergeant Kane's. A profound stillness settled over the range, the kind that precedes a storm. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Then she spoke. Her voice was still quiet, yet it sliced through the tension like a scalpel. All right, the single word hung in the air, heavier than any threat. It wasn't an acceptance of his challenge. It was a granting of his request. Kane, taken aback for a second, quickly recovered with a bark of laughter. All right, you hear that, boys? Grandma's going to give us a lesson. He made a great show of it, patronizingly gesturing for her to come forward. Come on, then. Don't be shy. We'll get you set up. Careful now, don't trip. Alara ignored his outstretched hand and walked to the firing mat. Her movements were deliberate, economical. An observer might have mistaken her careful pace for the stiffness of old age, but it was something else entirely. The conservation of energy, the practiced grace of a predator. She didn't lie down on the mat immediately. Instead, she knelt, her eyes scanning the range, assessing the wind not by the flags, but by the subtle dance of heat haze and the drift of dust motes. She took the rifle from Kane without a word. He released it, expecting her to stumble under its weight. She didn't. She cradled it in her arms as if it were a part of her. The rookies had stopped smirking. They watched, transfixed, as she worked. Her gnarled fingers, which had seemed frail moments before, moved with a startling sureness. She checked the chamber, tested the action of the bolt, and ran a thumb along the stock. She wasn't just holding a weapon, she was communing with it. She settled onto the mat, not with a clumsy flop, but with a fluid motion that coiled her small frame into a position of impossible stability. It was a textbook sniper's posture, perfected beyond what any manual could teach. Kane stood over her, his arms crossed, the smug look on his face beginning to curdle into uncertainty. This was not the fumbling he had anticipated. Alara adjusted the scope with a few precise clicks, her eye never leaving the eyepiece. She didn't ask for the range or windage. She knew. She settled the butt of the rifle into the pocket of her shoulder, becoming one with the machine. Her body grew incredibly still. Her breathing slowed until it was almost imperceptible. The entire world seemed to shrink, focusing down the long barrel of the rifle to a single point of intention 800 yards away. The trainees held their breath. Sergeant Kane found himself leaning forward, a knot of dread tightening in his stomach. The air cracked. The shot was not the thunderous boom the rookies produced, but a sharp, clean whip of sound. It was the sound of pure efficiency. Before the echo had faded, the spotter's voice crackled over the radio, filled with stunned disbelief. Hit. Bullseye. Dead. Dead center. A murmur rippled through the trainees. Kane's face went rigid. Lucky shot. He muttered, more to himself than anyone else. A blind squirrel finds a nut every once in a while. Alara gave no sign that she had heard him. Her hand moved with a speed that defied her age, ejecting the spent casing and chambering a new round in a single, seamless motion. Her eye never left the scope. Her breathing hitched once, twice, and then she was still again. The second shot ripped through the silence. The spotter's voice was now an octave higher. Hit. Sir. It's in the same hole. I can't even see a new tear in the paper. Kane's jaw went slack. This wasn't luck. This was mastery. Alara worked the bolt again. Crack. Hit. And again. Crack. Hit. And a fifth time. Crack. Sir. The spotter's voice was now trembling with awe. It's a one-hole group. She's driving the nail. I've never seen anything like it. Alara calmly unchambered the weapon, made it safe, and pushed herself up from the mat. She looked at the rifle, then placed it gently back on its stand. Just as Kane stood frozen, his mind refusing to process the impossible reality before him, the crunch of tires on gravel announced a new arrival. A black command vehicle pulled to a stop, and two men emerged. One was Colonel Miller, the base commander. The other was a man who wore his 4 stars with an air of quiet, absolute authority. The general took in the scene at a glance: the stunned rookies, the shell-shocked sergeant, and the old woman standing calmly by the rifle. Colonel Miller saw Kane's expression and the rifle in Alara's lane, and his face went white with horror. But the general simply smiled, a warm, genuine expression of recognition and delight. "Alara," he said, his voice resonating with deep respect. "I see you're still keeping your eyes sharp. I should have known I'd find you here." Alara gave a small, modest nod. "Just passing the time." "Marcus," the general turned his piercing gaze upon Sergeant Kane, who had snapped to a rigid, trembling attention. "Sergeant." The general's voice was calm, but it carried the weight of command. "Do you have any idea who you've been so generously offering shooting lessons to this morning?" Kane could only manage to shake his head, his throat too tight to form words. The rookies stared, their minds racing. The general's smile vanished, replaced by a look of profound reverence. "You are in the presence of Chief Warrant Officer 5 Alara Vance, retired." Though her official record is impressive enough, those of us who had the honor of serving with her know her by a different name. He paused, letting the weight of his next words settle on the silent range. "We called her the Ghost, and you, Sergeant, are standing on what is effectively her holy ground. This is the woman who wrote the book on modern sniping. In fact, she wrote the very training manual you are so poorly attempting to teach." The general's words landed like artillery shells, shattering the last remnants of Kane's composure. The rookies looked from the 4-star general to the quiet old woman, their expressions a mixture of shock, awe, and a dawning, terrible understanding. This wasn't just a veteran. This was a living legend. Colonel Miller, seeing the need to educate the ignorant, stepped forward. His voice was low, almost reverent, as if he were recounting scripture. "Sergeant Kane, Chief Vance holds the confirmed record for the longest successful combat shot in a sandstorm, a shot that doctrine said was impossible. She once held a mountain pass against an enemy platoon, alone, for 72 hours, with nothing but her rifle and 20 rounds. They called off the assault because they thought they were facing a company of Marines, not one woman." The general picked up the narrative. "Her call sign was the Ghost because she was never seen, never heard. Entire enemy command structures would simply cease to exist. They would find the aftermath, but never the cause. Most of her commendations are so heavily classified they'll never see the light of day. But I can tell you this," he said, his eyes locking onto Kane's. "She was recommended for the Medal of Honor not once, but 3 times. She turned it down every time, stating she was just doing her job." He gestured to Alara. "The woman you just insulted, the woman whose time you wasted with your arrogant posturing, has forgotten more about marksmanship, combat, and honor than you will ever learn. You are not fit to carry her rifle case, let alone critique her form." Each word was a nail hammered into the coffin of Kane's career. The rookies looked at Alara, truly seeing her for the first time. The faded flannel shirt was no longer a sign of poverty, but the unassuming camouflage of a master. The wrinkles around her eyes were not from age, but from decades of squinting through a scope, deciding the fates of battles from a mile away. Sergeant Kane stood as if turned to stone, the desert sun beating down on him, offering no warmth against the cold shame flooding his veins. His arrogance, once a suit of armor, had been stripped away, leaving him exposed and utterly broken. He stared at a fixed point in the dust, unable to meet the eyes of anyone around him. The general was not finished. His voice, though no longer raised, was sharp and precise, each word a carefully aimed shot. "Your primary failure today wasn't your team's inability to hit a target, Sergeant. It was your inability to see one. You looked at a hero, a founding pillar of our community, and all you saw was a frail old woman. Your ego blinded you. A leader's job is to see potential, to see strength, to see the truth of a person. You saw nothing." He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "That failure in perception gets people killed. It erodes trust. It destroys morale. You are not a leader. You are a bully who hides behind his stripes. You used this woman as a tool to belittle your own men, when you should have been on your knees hoping for a single piece of her wisdom to fall your way. You are relieved of your duties as an instructor, effective immediately. Report to Colonel Miller's office at 1,400 hours. Your future in my army is now under serious review. Dismissed. Kane managed a shaky salute, turned with the stiff, jerky movements of a marionette, and walked away, his career and his pride crumbling into dust with every step. The rookies watched him go, not with satisfaction, but with a somber understanding of the lesson they had just witnessed. It was a lesson far more important than windage or trigger control. It was a lesson in humility. Alara watched Kane's retreating figure for a moment before turning her attention back to the trainees. They stood in a loose, intimidated cluster, looking at her as if she were a monument come to life. She walked over and picked up the rifle from its stand, but this time, she offered it to Corporal Davis, the young man whose rifle it was. He took it with trembling hands. She looked at the young faces before her, seeing not just soldiers, but a legacy. And for the first time, she spoke at length, her voice soft but carrying the weight of hard-won experience. He was wrong, she began, nodding in the direction Kane had gone. What you saw from him, the anger, the disrespect, that's noise. It gets inside your head. It makes your heart beat faster, makes your hands shake. You can't be a sniper with a loud heart. She tapped her own chest lightly. The shot doesn't come from the rifle. It comes from here, from a place of stillness. You have to be calm, not just your body, your mind. You have to be separate from the noise, from the fear, from the ego. When you look through that scope, the world should go away. There is only you, your breath, and the target. Everything else is a distraction. She then glanced toward Colonel Miller and the general, but her words were pitched just loud enough for Kane, now a distant figure, to potentially overhear. He's young, she said softly. Arrogant, but strong. That can be molded. Don't break him. Teach him. The best steel has to go through the hottest fire. It was an act of profound grace, a quiet plea for redemption for the man who had just tried to humiliate her. For the trainees, it was the final, and most important, lesson of the day. True strength wasn't just about destroying your enemies, but also about having the grace to save them from themselves. The general nodded slowly, a deep respect for Alara shining in his eyes. As always, you teach us all, Chief. He then turned to her with a gentler expression. But you didn't come all this way to give my sergeants a lesson in humility. What brings you out here, Alara? She reached down and picked up the canvas satchel she had set on the ground. From it, she retrieved a small, worn wooden box. She held it out to Colonel Miller. I had a promise to keep, she said simply. Miller opened the box. Inside, resting on a bed of faded velvet, were a pair of dog tags. Specialist Peterson, Miller read, his voice thick with emotion. He was one of ours. Killed in action 6 months ago, Alara's gaze was distant. He was one of my students, years ago. A good kid, all heart. I promised his mother that if anything ever happened to him, I would personally bring his tags back to his unit's memorial wall. A promise is a promise. It was a simple, quiet mission of honor, undertaken by a woman who lived by a code that modern armies struggled to teach. Her presence on the range wasn't an accident. It was a pilgrimage. As she prepared to leave with the senior officers, Corporal Davis, the young sniper, took a hesitant step forward. Ma'am, he stammered, his face flushed. Chief Vance, ma'am. Would you sign my rifle's logbook? He held out the worn, data-filled book like a holy text. Alara paused. A flicker of surprise, then a genuine, warm smile touched her lips for the first time that day. Of course, son. As she took the offered pen, the other trainees surged forward, each one holding out their own log books, notebooks, even a spare piece of paper. They crowded around her, not as soldiers before a superior, but as acolytes at the feet of a master. They didn't want an autograph from a celebrity. They wanted a connection to a legend, a tangible piece of the quiet, unshakable strength she embodied. Alara Vance, the ghost, stood in the center of the circle, the desert sun glinting off her silver hair, and began to sign, passing her legacy on, not with a bullet, but with a simple act of acknowledgement and grace.
I just want to take a moment to say a huge thank you to each and every one of you. Folded hands, your love, support, likes, comments, and subscriptions mean the world to me. Without you, this journey wouldn't be possible. Every view, every share, and every encouraging word keeps me motivated to create more content for you all. I'm truly grateful to have such an amazing community by my side. Let's keep growing together and making this journey even more special. Red Heart.